We're going to open up. Wow, listen to that echo. This is a singer's dream, you know. All right. Let's see. We're going to open up the hearing for HB 1775 and hear from our prime sponsor. Good morning, prime sponsor. How are you today?
Good morning, Senator Avard and committee. I am just peachy. Beautiful, beautiful day in the neighborhood, right?
Oh, you're gonna get me singing. Hang on. Go for it. You have the floor.
Thank you. Representative J.D. Bernardi, prime sponsor, Rockingham 36, Hampton Falls, Kensington, Southampton, Newton, and Plastow. So as we all know, the governor and the members of New Hampshire's population have all declared the price of electricity is too high. Well, why is this? In my opinion, we've shut down reliable power plants, nuclear, coal, and oil, and foreclosed access to pipeline gas and subsidized unreliable renewables and energy efficiency. That's not a bad thing. It kept growth flat, but now it's growing again. So we need to have power when we have tough winter days. That's the important peak that we need to be concerned about. So this bill focuses on micronuclear and gas production at the distributed energy level, less than 5 megawatts. Our New England power producers who have testified on this bill in the House side basically said that they are not going to play in this market because there's no return on investment yet. They are going to focus on the Southeast and central United States where they get subsidies, they get a much better return on investment, and New England is just going to have to wait until we get to a position of extremis. So the bill is very simple. It authorizes distributed energy production by the utilities up to 10% of their distribution capacity. A added benefit, since it's in the distribution energy side, we're connecting to local poles and wires. We are not going to be tapping into the transmission line systems. And as we know, ISO New England has changed its day-ahead contracting because of such a large amount of renewable power. They needed to have, and it's unreliability, they needed to have more contracting power available for day-ahead market. It's gone from 140 million last year to $920 million for ISO New England this year. That's just unacceptable. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Sounds like a good idea.
It's a great idea.
So, any questions from the committee? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. So 5 megawatts is relatively small.
Yes.
What would be the cost to build a 5 megawatt natural gas plant?
I do not know the cost. I do know that such units are commercially available, so they could be used, and ideally, as utilities look at stress points in their system, they could place them there where that maybe there's a growing market because a industrial park is growing or whatever, and they can help take the stress off that area. I do not know the cost. I'm sorry.
Your follow-up?
Thank you. So, this cost would be recovered in the rates, right?
Yeah, any development that the utilities create goes into their rate base, yes.
Follow-up.
Follow-up?
Thank you. So wouldn't that actually make the cost of energy more expensive? Because there's some unknown cost to build this 5 megawatt, let's say, natural gas plant, and that cost would be recoverable
Well,
by the ratepayer?
you're going to have the PUC look at any proposal and evaluate it for the cost benefit relationship, and the PUC is going to have to make a determination that it's in the benefit of the ratepayers to do that. I think you're not going to just create a bunch of small 5 megawatt operations just to generate a revenue stream for the utilities. It has to be a benefit to the ratepayers.
Thank you.
Senator Waters, question?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And, my questions come from the fact that this committee is generally believe in all the above resources, whereas this seems to prioritize gas and nuclear, which have shown very little interest in the state for any investment at this scale. But anyways, I just was curious about the definition of reliable in that, since the peak energy plants have one of the highest rates of breakdown in New England when they've been used over the last many years. Do you consider not reliable when it's renewed distributed energy with battery resources?
With batteries?
Yeah.
No, I don't consider batteries unreliable. I don't. I think the issue with batteries is they only last, well, the big lithium batteries they last 4 hours. So, and I appreciate the all above approach. We already have solar authorized as a distributed energy production in our current statutes. My focus on this bill was to add what I considered the long-term reliables.
So if I may just
Yep.
follow. So based on your answer about the renewables combined with battery, which now they're 24-hour batteries, that might fit under the definition of reliable as you, based on your answer.
It very well may, yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Representative. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we're going to put everybody on a 2-minute timeline because we still have a lot of things to go, a lot of bills to discuss this morning. So with that, we're going to ask John Gage to come up. And set the timer.
Thank you, Senator Havard and committee members for hearing my testimony today. I'm John Gage from Windham, and I oppose this bill. I think the state made a good decision by separating energy distribution from energy production a while ago, and there were good reasons for doing that. We need to maintain that separation. There's multiple reasons, more than 2 minutes of reasons why I disagree with this bill. But I'll give you a story of Eversource, why they should not be in the fossil fuel delivery business or use business, as well as distributing energy. We need them focused on Grid 2.0 technologies, making our grids work with distributed energy resources, and not figuring out how to produce electricity. I'm a volunteer with a group that's advocating for a bipartisan carbon fee and dividend at the federal level to address the market failure of free fossil fuel pollution. I go to leaders in the state and try to get endorsements for this policy. When I visited Eversource, they said, we can't really endorse this policy, even though it's the economist's most well-recommended market-based revenue-neutral solution to reduce climate pollution, because we deliver gas in Connecticut. And because we're in the fossil fuel business and correcting the energy market would hurt the fossil fuel business, we really don't think this is in our best interest. So that's my basic testimony. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Gage. Nick Krikoff. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, good morning. Nice to see you again. Nick Rakoff with the Conservation Law Foundation. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to testify in opposition to HB 1775. I've also hit on written comments. One thing that I want to note is that this bill is in a lot better place than it was when it was first introduced in the House, so appreciate the sponsors working to improve it. But and I share the chief sponsor's interest in improving affordability for energy in the state, but allowing utility ownership of nuclear and natural gas facilities up to 10% of a utility's peak load is a pretty significant departure from the state's utility restructuring law. The overall purpose of the restructuring law was to reduce costs for consumers by harnessing competitive markets. And pursuant to the restructuring law, utilities sold off most of their generation assets. And there are currently only narrow exceptions for the prohibition of utilities owning generation assets. HB 1775 would create a much larger exception than what's under current law by allowing utility ownership of facilities up to 10% of utilities' peak load. And so for Eversource, which is the biggest electric utility in the state, that would translate to authorizing them to construct, invest in, own nuclear facilities with a cumulative nameplate capacity of nearly 200 megawatts. As was already mentioned, because the utility would likely seek to add the cost of such facilities to its rate base and recover those costs from ratepayers, HB 1775 could create substantial financial risks for ratepayers in the event of cost overruns or other unforeseen circumstances, which is often the case with nuclear investments. I just want to note for the record, CLF is not categorically opposed to nuclear. It could make sense for the state in certain circumstances, definitely. But 1775 could create major financial risks for ratepayers if utilities attempt to build and operate advanced nuclear reactors, which, given the first advanced nuclear reactors that have been under construction, they've faced considerable cost overruns and have been more expensive on a per kilowatt basis than most other sources of energy. So for those reasons, I urge the committee to vote ITL on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Clifton Below.
Good morning, members of the committee. Yes. I'm Clifton Below with the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, and we oppose the bill in the current form. We do think it was improved from the bill as introduced. We're not opposed to promoting the smaller scale micro or nano reactors. There's a couple that are under development, Westinghouse eVinci, for instance. Nanotechnologies, a couple that are going to soon start testing at a national lab. And those, in fact, might be the first commercially viable small modular, very modular reactors. And in particular, in this context, the under 5 megawatt is a niche that I think New Hampshire could develop. But I think our concern is that to the extent utilities are enabled to get back into the business of owning such generation, there needs to also be enabling a competitive market that can realize the same value stack as the utilities can. And so specifically, just a couple things, I would point out where did this whole chapter come from? Well, way back in 1994, when we were developing the restructuring policy principles, one of those said that generation services should be subject to market competition and minimal economic regulation, and at least functionally separated from transmission and distribution. And however, distribution service companies should not be absolutely precluded from owning small-scale distributed generation resources as part of a strategy for minimizing transmission and distribution costs. That sentence is one that I happened to actually draft way back in 1994. The irony here is a little bit that there was opposition at the time from Republicans. They felt we should be absolute about separating the monopoly distribution and generation. That being said, the concern is specifically in RSA 374G whoops, can I go just slightly longer?
Slightly.
Okay. A provision that says the costs are recovered through the distribution rate, perhaps net of any revenues received. What I think needs to occur to sort of open up a market is to have the avoided transmission costs recovered through the transmission charge and avoided energy and capacity charged against default service to the extent that it fits there in the balance on distribution. That would move us in the direction of competitive market also being able to take advantage of those particular value stacks.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Cliff. Good golly, Miss Molly. I had to. I saw it. It's in my DNA.
All right. Good morning, Molly Connors with the New England Power Generators Association. Thank you for your time. We are formally in opposition to this bill, but first off, I want to say I, number one, appreciate the sponsor's intent, which is to incentivize more generation in the region. Number two, I know that the bill as it has been amended is different than the way it was introduced. And we appreciate that the sponsors and the House members listened to us and took our feedback. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank them for that. I'm here as a matter of policy and principle, though. We want to flag that we still believe that 1775 sets a bad precedent to return to failed policies that this state deliberately moved away from, getting utilities back into the rate-based generation, even if it's relatively humble in size, with state-regulated guaranteed consumer cost recovery will discourage the very investment that the state says it wants to incentivize. Most importantly, this bill will not speed construction. This bill will not lower costs for power plants. In fact, it will do the opposite. Utilities face the same real-world bottlenecks as all other developers. Allowing rate-based generation does not fix permitting. It does not fix siting. It does not fix interconnection. It does not fix supply chain delays. All this does is shift the risk of potentially unlimited risk from private investors onto captive utility customers. I will end by sharing just the context, a reminder of the generator industry. The power generating industry is very different than the one that our utilities currently operate in. The companies that own power generating facilities are experts in their specific technologies and their business models. Our utilities, in contrast, are experts in transmitting reliably and safely that electricity from the point it's generated to the point that it's consumed. I would say that HB 1775 continues to send the message that New England does not want market-based resources. It instead wants to pick and choose who will serve the electricity in terms of technology type. And that discourages the members that I represent, who are the non-utility owned power plants, from putting their private capital into New Hampshire. And I am mindful of the time. I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions from the committee? Well, good job. Questions from the committee? Wow. I have a question.
I'm ready.
With all these bills that are coming up, our constituents are asking for a solution to these high energy costs. And it's coming in different forms in questions. We do support all the above, and there's a lot of bipartisan work on that. And we've all worked together very stridently to do that. This is another attempt to focus on the rates and the needs, the supply. What is the solution? How do we fix the problem of these high energy costs if not through nuclear?
I appreciate that question. I know it's a question you all get all the time. I get it too. I can't go anywhere without someone asking me that. I would caveat this with the fact that I know the power generating industry better than I know, say, transmission or distribution, and so I will focus where I bring expertise. I would say the degree that you can rely on competition, you will drive down costs. So, for example, my members live and die in the wholesale markets. The wholesale electricity markets are focused on what is the least expensive way to generate a given megawatt at a given time to meet reliability. And so a bill like this says we're going to subsidize a particular power plant because we like the idea of the technology. And that is tempting because there is so much potential with nuclear power. And I appreciate this specifically because I represent 3 companies that own and operate nuclear all over the country. I represent Dominion, which has the largest nuclear power plant in the region in Connecticut. I represent Seabrook, which we all know is in New Hampshire. And I represent Constellation, which has power plants all over the country. They own more nuclear than any other company in the country. And I would point that none of them are operating with utility ownership. They're doing it in the markets. And so with a bill like this, I would urge you to do no harm in terms of the cost of generating electricity. If my members can generate a given megawatt hour more cheaply than the utility-owned one, they should be able to run and make their money. And a bill like this says, no matter the cost, if the state regulator says this is prudent, you get your money back. This is not a way to lower costs for consumers.
So we have 3 other bills that have nuclear, 221, 447, and 591. I believe they also take out the subsidies from the guaranteed rate of return on 1 or 2 of those, I believe. This bill doesn't necessarily do that, but we did address that because you brought that up in another hearing, correct?
Right. If I were a utility, I wouldn't build anything if I did not have the rate of return.
So those other bills that are still in the pipeline, that might solve one of your issues as far as the guaranteed rate of return, correct?
I'm trying to refamiliarize myself with those bills because
One was
didn't-
447, 221, and I know I get this all the time. Hey,
Yeah.
do you know anything about the 591?
No, I get it. If I recall, 221 is focused exclusively on, well, can we focus on this bill? Because I feel like there are 3 other bills that have different hearings or at different points in there. Like I know that 221 is going to a committee of conference and that'll be a very different conversation. Yeah, or that's what I heard. 447 was voted to ITL and 591 is a live wire. And they all look at nuclear and hold up the promise of nuclear, but they don't have the same wording as this bill.
Did you say 591 was a live wire?
It was a pun that I did not intend,
I
sir.
like it. I caught that. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for taking my question. So I've always thought that you gain something from economies of scale when you have large projects of any kind. This contemplates very small projects. So where would the savings be from building small projects versus buying power from large generating companies? I'm not seeing the savings because I'm not seeing the economies of scale.
I understand that. And I think that is an interesting line that this bill is trying to strike, in fairness to the supporters. They're saying this is so small that it will just give the utilities a new tool to manage demand or peak load. And I understand that. That's at the heart of the value of distributed energy. Like it's not a huge power plant. The idea is allow the utilities to lower demand. At a much higher level, I get a question all the time. Why aren't we seeing more merchant investment in power plants? It's a very fair question in New England. And the answer is multifold, but one of them is, and Representative Bernardi touched on this, for a long time, the demand in New England was flat. It was due to distributed energy investments. It was due to energy efficiency. Public policy said we want flat demand because then we don't have to buy as much transmission, we don't have to buy as much generation. And now, in spite of that, demand is starting to tick up after 5-10 years. And so my point would be, the size isn't so much about the economy of scale. For me, my members are saying, oh, demand is ticking up in New England. Maybe we should start, maybe it'll go high enough that we can reasonably invest between $500 million and $1 billion and make it back over 20 years. But if you say, nope, we're going to let the utilities handle that. Nope, we don't want the load to go up. We're scared of the load going up. Then my members say, okay, well then you've got it set. You're sending the signal that you don't want private investment. We will invest in a state that has increasing demand that's higher and frankly, much more forgiving permitting and interconnection and siting. And so your point about the economies of scale are right on, but it's all, to me, it's all sends the signal, we want the utilities to handle this, not the merchant power plants. And the merchant power plants are the experts and they can do it more cheaply than the utilities.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank
Any
you.
further questions? Susan? I don't have a song for Susan. Is there a song for Susan?
Susan Q.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, Susan.
Okay, I'll try and live that down. I'm Susan Richmond from Durham, speaking for myself. In opposition to 1775, I think there are just too many vulnerabilities on the ratepayer, that this bill walks back emissions and efficiency standards. It repeals previous limitations on equipment and investment, opens the door to future utility construction. And in all cases, any cost overruns are the responsibility of the ratepayer. Now, the fiscal note appended to this bill has a table indicating the cost to the state would be zero. And it further states the bill's not expected to affect state revenues. But number one, the ratepayers would be paying any stranded costs. And that is precisely those cost overruns with Seabrook. That's what prompted the restructuring in the first place that separated production and distribution. I'd like to add further, the fiscal note lists the need for 2 new positions within the PUC, anticipating the fiscal impact could range between $100,000 and $500,000 annually. But then it goes on to say there is no direct state expenditure impact on the department's budget. However, this bill may result in increased electricity rates for customers. So if the goal of this bill was to make rates easier for customers, I don't think it's going to be successful in that regard. The goal is also for 1775 to boost New Hampshire's reliable energy supply, but we're seeing around the world and in Texas and other states, clean, renewable energy, solar, wind, battery storage is available, reliable, far less expensive right now. So no one quite needs energy to be as expensive as 1775 might make it. And that's it. Any questions?
Well done. Good job.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alec O'Meara, Unitil.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, I am Alec O'Meara. I am the Director of External Affairs at Unitil. We are supporters of House Bill 1775, as we are supporters for its companion bill, which we see does something very similar, which is Senate Bill 591. Both address the idea of distributed energy resources that sit where we sit on the electric system, which is below the transmission level, and deliver energy at a local level to all customers, meaning that all customers that are served by that distribution system are benefiting from that generation, whether they take default service, whether they take service from a third-party supplier. And that's because it is helping offset the load that has to come in on transmission lines. And I think that's one of the big key parts of this kind of generation, is that it lives at that level, and that local generation being part of a distribution asset helps you run the system more efficiently as a whole. Unitil has the one such facility that exists in New Hampshire. That would be the Kingston Solar Array that went online just last year. That we had to go through a rigorous process at the Public Utilities Commission to demonstrate that facility would ultimately provide a benefit to our customers, and that process would exist for any other such facility should it be approved. Between the two bills, I'd say we do like Senate Bill 591 a hair more. We find the language more fuel neutral. But at the same time, distributed energy resources can be fuel neutral regardless of how they're generating that energy. They provide that service to the region as a whole. To that, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, well done, thank you. Mike Licata.
Morning, Michael Licata representing Eversource. I'll be very brief. I think Mr. O'Mara did an excellent job kind of covering the utility position. Eversource is supportive of the legislation. We think that it makes helpful changes to the existing statute that allows utilities to propose DER, Distributed Energy Resource projects, to the Public Utilities Commission for approval. As Mr. O'Mara said, similar in terms of approach to Senate Bill 591, although there are differences in that approach. Looking at the two bills this morning, those aren't in conflict with one another. However, there could be sort of synergies through a committee of conference process if the Senate wanted to pass the bill. I won't repeat the testimony I gave on that bill about how this is helpful for utilities to manage cost, but certainly the committee is well aware of the regional supply challenges, and as Mr. O'Mara said, that these can be valuable tools to help the utilities manage those resources. Two other very quick points. One, RSA 374G 52 lays out a 9-factor test that the Public Utilities Commission must employ before approving these. It's a very high bar, and as the committee is aware, there's only actually one project that has been approved by Unitil to date. So there's a lot of rigor in this. As it's also been discussed, these are small projects, while the overall cap is 10% of a utility's peak peak distribution, which for Eversource is 183 megawatts statewide. There are 5 megawatt projects that, as Mr. O'Mara said, sit on the distribution system. And then just one final point that the chair had mentioned, utility rate of return. And I always just want to point out, utilities are not guaranteed a rate of return. Utilities have the opportunity to earn up to a certain rate of return that functions as a cap or a ceiling. It is not a floor. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Senator Waters, then Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the bottom of the first page of the bill, and I agree with you that I think this can be helpful as the other bill is helpful. So, do you think on line 27 there, it goes may to shall? Do you think that makes a lot of difference, because the Public Utilities Commission would have to decide anyways?
I don't actually. I focused on that this morning in preparation. And so the change is a New Hampshire Electric Public Utility. Current law is may seek rate recovery for its portion of investments. It changes to shall be eligible to seek rate recovery. I think those effectually do the same thing.
Yeah, they actually do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But one's in bold.
That's true.
Further questions? Senator Rosenwald.
If Eversource were to build 183 megawatts to fully take advantage of this, I'm guessing that the company would seek some kind of bond or borrow money to do this rather than paying it out of current expenses. And so my question is, given that you told us a couple of weeks ago your bond rating is a BB, what is your interest rate like on bonds, and how much would it cost Eversource to build 183 megawatts of either natural gas or nuclear power?
Sure. Great question. First, I think it's triple B. But,
Okay, you told
but
us double B.
I apologize if I, and that's subject to check. But essentially, this would be funded like any utility investment is today. So if we're working in the street, if we're replacing lines, poles, transformers, if we're doing transmission work, essentially that is funded as a capital project. A portion of that, around 50%, we do go out and borrow at our, which is subject to our interest rate. The other half is in rates and is funded essentially directly through the rates that we charge. And so that is sort of the utility, what's known as cost of capital, which is the portion that's funded out of rates that we are eligible to earn up to a rate of return on, and then what we are borrowing in the market. In terms of, your very fair question, how much would that cost? It really, there's so many different factors. This is up to 10%. They're in 5 megawatt increments. I can't tell you how much a 5 megawatt nuclear reactor would cost today. I feel very confident that it is not cost effective. It's not a commercialized technology as we sit here today. Several years in the future, when more of these are built at scale, perhaps it will be. But there's just a lot of different factors, and all of that would be subject to PUC review and approval. And one thing that doesn't get talked about with 374G is it's not line workers, Eversource employees who are going out and building these. We actually, per the statute, have to go out and competitively bid all of this. So in the case of the Kingston project for Unitil, I believe it was Revision Energy, a private company, actually constructed the project.
Oh,
Thank you. So that was a long non-answer.
Well, it's a long answer of there's too many different variables
Okay.
to be able to,
Let me just ask, what would your interest rate be to borrow half of the cost, whether it's double B or triple B?
I'd be happy to provide you with our current interest rate. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I can certainly share that with the committee
Thank
via
you.
email.
further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Lucado. And our final speaker, the wonderful, the supreme, Mr. Josh Ellis. Noble, I should say noble, noble. Trying to come up with a new one every time. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs with the Department of Energy. The department is neutral on 1775. I believe, the speakers before me have laid out sort of the policy considerations before you, so I'm going to leave that aside given the time constraints here, but I think it's been laid out by previous speakers quite well. I do want to draw attention to two potential conflicts that this bill may have with Senate Bill 591, which passed this committee earlier. Specifically, this 10% idea. So in Senate Bill 591, there was a talk about 10% for distributed energy resources. This bill speaks to a 10% for natural gas and nuclear resources. So in effect, if both bills were to pass in their current state, you'd have 20%, 10% in each silo. Just something for consideration. I don't know if that was an intent, but just to flag that
Is
for
that more
consideration.
energy?
I'm sorry? Yeah. Further, as Mr. Licata noted in RSA 374G5 Roman 2, those are the list of criteria that the Public Utilities Commission is supposed to consider when reviewing one of these projects, should a utility come in and present it and seek approval to construct. Subsection B currently reads the efficient and cost-effective realization of the purposes of the renewable portfolio standards of RSA 362F. And the restructuring policy principles of RSA 374F3. Given these two technology types that are contemplated here, currently do not qualify under the renewable portfolio standards, I had suggested language in my letter to just clarify that that consideration about the impact on the RPS or to the benefit of the RPS would only be considered if the technology type actually qualifies under the renewable portfolio standard. So with that, I'm happy to stop and take any questions the committee may have.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Joshua. And with that, we are going to close the hearing. Where is that? Okay, I need these, guys. Yeah. I did close the hearing, but I'm going to let you speak.
My name is Catherine Corkery. I represent New Hampshire Sierra Club. I'll be quick. We had 5 issues. We oppose the bill as written, though I really appreciate all of the effort going into this. This is a real, it picks winners. And our major concerns are that these are, first off, are risky and unproven technology that is not, what did I say? It's not in practice in real life. It's not out in the wild. And that is a problem. It also walks back the divestiture policy decision that was made because of the cost to ratepayers. I represent a lot of people who are residential customers. And what we want now, as you spoke earlier about, are solutions to our high energy bills. Unfortunately, number 3, this bill supports the most expensive way to boil water with nuclear power and pipeline natural gas. Not only are they the most volatile resources on the global market for the natural gas, but they're also major targets to our adversaries. What this bill lacks is support for cheaper, faster, cleaner energy resources that are available now. Number 4, again, the slippery slope to rolling back divestitures, allowing utilities to pass on. And lastly, number 5 is that the regulated utilities, if they're allowed to build power plants, they can automatically charge ratepayers, and that's really dangerous. We know that is the experience here in New Hampshire. And
Can you
thank
pass that
you.
in for us, and we'll get that distributed to everybody in the committee. Thank you very much. We did close the hearing, so we're going to hear from the prime sponsor of 1542 FN. I might do this one. I like this one. But you don't have to. Yeah. Representative, whenever you are ready.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, senators, and hardworking staff. I'm Representative Janine Nodder, Town of Merrimack, Hillsborough 12. So 1542 is simply just rebates compliance payments back to ratepayers, just like we did with Reggie. So currently, this situation is a backdoor tax. It's used for projects, a redistribution of wealth. In the last budget cycle, that fund was rated to add to the general fund. So the beneficiaries of the subsidy didn't get any like they usually do, and they didn't cease to exist. So that rules out the argument that, all these companies are going to go out of business. In the grand scheme of things, $6.7 million might not be a lot of money, but the fact that a quarter of that money goes toward overhead to run the subsidy program, a savings is still a savings. And the only way to put money back into the pockets of our constituents is to chip away wherever we can. So I ask you to support the bill.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you noted, two of us here on finance or three of us, excuse me, worked hard on the language that's in the budget. And this does, in a sense, reopen the budget, does it not?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
On 1542, there are three of us here who on finance,
Okay.
and we worked considerably on the agreement that was made in finance in the budget about this fund. And so in a sense, doesn't this reopen the budget?
Reopen the budget?
Yeah, meaning that it takes something that is a 2-year plan in the budget and amends that, which is something we rarely do. But I just wanted to, I guess I'm just pointing out that we came to an agreement over this fund in the budget, and that was agreed to both by the House and the Senate in terms of a 2-year budget cycle.
Well, what's done is done. This is moving forward.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do have a state rep. Representative Bernardi, you didn't want to speak, right? But you're in support of the bill. Okay. All right, Mr. Krikoff? 2 minutes, yeah. I get a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah, we're back on the 2-minute thing because we have a lot of people.
Hey, nice to see you again. Again, I'm Nick Krakoff with the Conservation Law Foundation, handing out written comments today in support of my testimony. This bill would essentially eliminate the Renewable Energy Fund going forward. Based on information in the Department of Energy's annual Renewable Energy Fund report, I calculated it out, and the average residential ratepayer would get about 48 cents per month. So pretty much a trivial amount being rebated if this bill goes through. I also want to tell you a little bit about the energy diversity benefits of the Renewable Energy Fund. One of the main purposes of the RPS, which includes the Renewable Energy Fund, is energy and fuel diversity to reduce exposure to volatile fossil fuel prices and stabilize and lower energy costs. I think this purpose is especially important now, given the current conflict in the Middle East, which has driven up fuel and energy prices for families and businesses in the state. So basically doing something, eliminating the fund and reducing energy and fuel diversity in the state is the wrong approach given what we've seen lately with energy prices. And then lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of the fund. So, you rebate the fund 48 cents per month for the average residential ratepayer. But if you look at the benefits side of the equation for the fund, the 2024 Renewable Energy Fund report, it estimated that the fund has leveraged over $460 million in private investments since its inception. So that's just leverage, by making those funds available, you're leveraging a lot of private investment as well. And it's been a boost to the state's economy, creating jobs for electricians and plumbers. And it's also provided nearly $16.4 million in funding for 56 renewable energy projects for schools, towns, and small businesses. Eliminating the Renewable Energy Fund would jeopardize these significant economic and job benefits that it provides to the state, and would likely prevent many small businesses, school districts, and local governments from undertaking vital energy projects that can reduce energy costs. So for these reasons, I urge the committee to vote ITL on the bill. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Questions from the committee?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Have a good flight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sam?
Sam's the man.
I mean, maybe there's another Sam? Nope.
It doesn't matter.
Whatever Sam would like to come up and speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Sam Evans-Brown, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. Clean Energy New Hampshire is opposed to this bill. I'd like to remind everybody the policy design of the renewable portfolio standard and the way it's supposed to work. We have a system in which we have goals for the utilities to hit in terms of how much renewable energy they're purchasing. They achieve those goals by purchasing renewable energy credits. And if there aren't enough credits on the market, they are able to pay an alternative compliance payment. That's what goes into the Renewable Energy Fund. The fund is supposed to be used to create more renewable energy generation so that there are enough renewable energy credits on the market so that the alternative compliance payments go away. This is intended to be a self-balancing policy. And what this bill fundamentally does, as well as the rating of the Renewable Energy Fund more generally, it fundamentally breaks this policy so that in the future, we will continue to see escalating costs that will continue to have to be rebated back to the ratepayers in what is essentially a shell game. It's really just bad policy to pursue something like this. And I would really encourage the committee to do the same thing that we recommended when we came to testify on House Bill 219, which is look to the recommendations that the Department of Energy put forth in their review, the 2025 review of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. There are a lot of really great recommendations in there as to how to move the RPS policy forward. And what's contemplated in this bill is not in those recommendations. That's all I have to say.
Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I guess would it be fair to say that, you know, for basically the effect of this bill be the price of a cup of coffee once a year, but the cost of it would be really to lose the kind of investments that are being made?
Certainly. And Mr. Craigoff spoke to the fuel diversity benefits of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which really was the reason why the RPS was created in the first place. You know, we have our regional markets. The shortcoming of the markets do an excellent job of optimizing which generator gets dispatched, you know, tomorrow. The price signals it sends, though, are very short term. With the forward capacity market, the farthest forward you get a price signal sent is 3 years in advance. So it is the purview of state lawmakers to have a slightly more far-sighted view of where we think the energy markets are going and to ensure that we are hedging our bets by investing in fuel diversity. And that really is what the RPS represents.
And, you know, since you've taken us back into the mists of time, you're Governor Lynch, I guess, that, as I recall, and I imagine you may as well, that one of the reasons that we did this was because we recognized that we were, well, as of 5 years ago, the estimate was spending over $400 million a year of taxpayer money on cardiopulmonary and asthma in this state caused by fossil fuel burning in this state. And that, you know, there's a public health benefit from this RPS.
That's correct. There are numerous unpriced externalities of air pollution and other types of pollution that it is wise public policy for you all to attempt to correct. You know, the market does not price everything.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Charles Niebling. Welcome, Charles. Thank you. Good morning, Senator Avard, members of the committee. I'm Charles Niebling. I'm a licensed professional forester and a tree farmer. I live in the town of Boscawen. Mr. Evans Brown did a very good job summarizing some of the comments I wish to make. I guess the key point I'd like to leave the committee with is to carefully and thoroughly consider the benefit side of the Renewable Energy Fund. I think what's been missing largely from deliberations in the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee over this and a long line of bills to undermine or eliminate renewable energy policy in the state is a recognition and importance in the value of the benefit side of the equation. Yes, there is a cost to ratepayers of alternative compliance payments. But this was a policy set in motion by the General Court many years ago, and it's a long game. It's a long game. The investments that are being made by people who take advantage of the rebates or the competitive grants are significant. They have long-term paybacks. The solidity and the careful thought behind the policy is essential to people making long-term investments. They need to know that the policy is going to be there to support them. As Sam said, the Renewable Energy Fund is all about
creating projects that generate recs that enable the compliance entities to meet their obligation under the RPS. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I just close by reminding the members of this committee about the Senate's long-standing commitment to supporting the RPS. It goes back many years. I was very involved in the original legislation in 2007 and Senate Bill 218 in 2012, which set in motion the policy that we're dealing with here today, that is the subject of this bill. And I hope you will continue to demonstrate that support going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Question from the committee? Seeing none. Heidi Kroll, Granite State Hydropower, Brookfield Renewable Power, and Great River Hydro. And Monadnock Paper is opposed but doesn't want to speak. Just want to let you know that she's here. I thought it was funny. All right, Mark Froling. Did I say your last name right?
Correct. Yeah. Thank you so much, Chairman and committee. My name is Mark Froling. I own and operate Froling Energy, which is a wood energy company in Keene, New Hampshire, just about an hour and a quarter away from here. And we are a beneficiary in many ways. I mean, at least our customers are the beneficiaries of the Renewable Energy Fund that has been in place here for the last 14, 15 years. And it is of great use to, of course, to our company, but mostly to our clients. And our clients are actually mostly the public schools, public sector, schools, certainly universities, hospitals, nursing homes, things like that. And there has been only one project in the last 14 years since this fund has started that has gone without this grant. And so it's quite vital that this grant is in place, not just for my company, but for the clients, of course, because the clients are the beneficiaries of this fund. It gets these projects started, and then these projects actually provide long-term savings for these schools, nursing homes, jails. And that is quite important because sometimes that little incentive in the beginning of a project grows into really long-term savings for the state, for the schools, for the jails and things like that. Because when you are get a little bit of funding, then it leverages a huge project out of the funding. And it is a subsidy for sure, but it is a well worth subsidy for the public at large, because then as the schools get improved, we lower their heating bills considerably. Our cost of heating is about 50% cheaper than over oil, or under oil, I should say. And so that's a tremendous benefit to the public, because then of course, the schools get publicly funded, so the taxes are a little bit lower because of these benefits. And so that's a tremendous benefit. And I would encourage you to look at this. And essentially, I oppose this bill.
Mark,
because
what's the
of
name of
these
your business? What is the name of the company?
Froling Energy.
Froling Energy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you have
an hour and a quarter to get here. Any questions from the committee?
Yeah, our projects are all over the state. I mean, we have over 400 boilers installed, lots of residential boilers as well, but primarily we're a commercial entity, and we serve public school and public entities, and some privates as well, and even some of the larger companies. And even the large companies, such as we're just entering into a project with Whalen Engineering, they have been funded for the first 3 projects out of this fund. It's incredibly important for a manufacturer like that has over 1,500 employees to get a project started. And even after, we're just starting a new project now after, I think the first project was in 2013. And so after 10 years, a company like that is very willing to go back because it has stabilized their fuel prices and their energy prices, and that has been tremendous, especially on a year like today, or like right now, where we're seeing an increase in oil prices. It's scary for them to look at their budget and see, can we afford it? And so they re-upped for another boiler plant for their new building, and that's a great sign.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the
If you
committee?
have any questions,
Seeing none. Thank you very much, Mark.
I'll submit this.
Susan? Welcome back. Your dream was your ticket out. Welcome back.
Okay, I'm gonna have to think of a Kevin song for you.
Yes. There isn't a Kevin song.
Okay, we'll work on it. So Susan Richmond, Durham, in opposition to 1542. So pretty much building on what Mr. Fruling and Mr. Evans Brown had to say, that this is not just about, yay, every ratepayer is going to get 48 cents a month back, but that the money that goes into the Renewable Energy Fund has much greater leverage. And I'm in Durham. I'm aware of the concerns of the Energy Committee. When there's a chance for us to lower our energy costs, taxpayer rates go down. Businesses are realizing that they want to work with the Renewable Energy Fund, and then the costs for customers go down. So this is not just a niche area for tree huggers. This really is an engine for our entire economy. So the other thing I'd like to say is that by violating the HB2 compromise reached last June, is there possibly legal issues at stake if 1542 is pursued? So please, I hope you find 1542 ITL. Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Mr. Gage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, again, and committee. I was glad to hear mention of external costs. Nicholas Stern, former economist for the World Bank, labeled the external costs from the pollution of fossil fuels the largest market failure in history. So I volunteer actually at the federal level trying to create the political will for the most cost-effective way to address this market failure. A steadily rising price on pollution charged to fossil fuel producers, rebated back to households. In the stapled document, the second one that I handed out to you, please look at page 3. I want to give you a global picture of what's going on with carbon pricing. The United States is the only developed country without some national carbon price. It's gone from 0% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide to 28% global coverage, a price on fossil fuel pollution. This market failure can't be addressed directly by the state. We need federal policy and global policy, but the state should prepare for a future price on carbon that comes to us from above. How do we prepare? By doing things like putting a small price on carbon, which is basically what the money that's going into the Renewable Energy Fund is doing. What should we do with that money? It's not costing the ratepayers much at all. The best use of that money is to accelerate our independence from fossil fuels in anticipation of a future carbon price. The fossil fuel industry has pushed a bunch of legislation down to our state this year. There was a bill that attempted to define gas as clean energy.
Can we talk about this bill?
Yeah, so this bill simply is good for the fossil fuel industry in that it withdraws some of the investments in clean energy alternatives, leaving us more dependent on fossil fuels. That's good for the fossil fuel industry business. It's not good for ratepayers. We want affordable, reliable, and safe energy. This market failure of external costs from fossil fuels is costing us all dearly. We need to address that outside of this room, but we should prepare for a price on carbon and please oppose this bill to help our state prepare for that.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Gage. Hannah Campbell. Is it Campbell or Campbell?
Campbell, like the soup. No song.
There's got to be a song for Campbell soup. Come on.
I had to ask. Good morning. I am here today on behalf of Mises, which is a modern wood heating company. We are here to provide testimony in opposition of HB 1542. Much like what Mark Froling spoke to, we have commercial and residential installations across New Hampshire, and we deliver bulk wood pellet heating fuel. Eliminating funding for residential and commercial wood pellet boiler rebates, as well as the commercial and industrial grant programs, would undermine initiatives that have supported numerous wood pellet and chip heating projects in New Hampshire since 2012. The fund that this bill seeks to reappropriate was created for the purpose of promoting renewables, such as wood pellets that are made in New Hampshire. Almost 60% of New Hampshire households rely on fossil fuels for heat, a large percentage of which is imported. And it strikes me that in a previous bill testimony heard here this morning, the reference to having technology and fuel that's local and available is important, and that is something that this technology is. These incentives that the Renewable Portfolio Standard was created for to provide an alternative to the costly and volatile fossil fuel market. We made an investment in establishing a marketplace in New Hampshire because of this purposed funding, and repurposing the Renewable Energy Fund disenfranchises businesses like ours that made decisions to expand in New Hampshire. Biomass markets, as you know, are a critical outlet for low-grade timber and sustainable forestry. With the loss of pulp and paper mills, the importance of wood heating markets has only grown. And I don't say that lightly as a North Country resident who rose at 6 this morning to get here. Wood pellets are a local energy source that supports sustainable forestry, and pellet fuel produced locally and less vulnerable to international supply disruptions offers stability that is increasingly rare in today's energy landscape, especially as fossil fuel prices continue to rise. I would just leave you with the point that this technology and this fuel is local, it's available, it's here now, and removing the incentive for New Hampshireites to have options is seemingly un-New Hampshire-esque, in my humble opinion as a Granite Stater. Thank you.
So Hannah,
Yes.
your company basically invested because of these, what's the word I'm looking for?
Rebates.
Rebates, thank you.
Yep.
I should know this.
Yep.
How long ago did they invest?
So Mises has been in business since 2009.
2009.
Started first in Maine. They're the primary distributor. They manufacture boilers out of Maine and distribute across North America. So the Northeast is kind of the bread and butter area. Having these rebates in the states right here, where we can deliver boilers and then deliver local fuel and keep costs stable, has been a big incentive, both for people to switch to pellet heating and for us to sustain our business.
And your industry basically helps out the forest industry, correct?
Well, it's a market for low-grade wood, because
Right.
wood pellets are essentially made from waste wood, tree limbs, sawdust. There's not much of a market for that without pulp and paper anymore.
And so that low-grade wood, if you didn't use it, would probably go into the landfills, correct?
That's my assumption, and I am not the forestry or the carbon accounting specialist in the room, but I understand that wood, when you burn it for fuel, releases carbon dioxide, and I understand that when it rots, it releases more methane, which is worse for the environment. So
Interesting.
it's a green element too.
Questions from the committee? Well done, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. The Noble Elliott. You are our final speaker. I'm gonna have to come up with something better.
I will, I was gonna say, maybe we can.
Yeah, we can do that. I know.
Dramatic announcement.
TSL? Oh. I'll stick with Noble right now.
Better than March.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs. Just sending around our letter here. Department's neutral in the bill. Given the time constraints, I think a lot of the folks before me have talked about what the programs currently do and what they fund in terms of renewable energy across the state, as well as the cost of doing so. I would just note that there is a potential conflict between this bill and Senate Bill 599, which this committee passed, just in terms of the language in Section 1 of the bill. If the desire of the committee is to move forward with this policy, I would suggest replacing Section 1 with the language that was passed, Section 1 and Section 2 of the language that was passed in 599, and replace or delete Section 1 with that. The way that the current bill currently sits, I think, as folks have mentioned previously, this would remove the $1 million that the department does have available for programs in the second year of the biennium. Doing this would change that, certainly within the purview of the legislature to change your minds, but that would result in probably a net lapse to the general fund of an additional $1 million.
Ooh. Questions from the committee? I see some squirrels going. Look, Senator Rosenwald.
Well, we're going to be looking for lapses, but we're also looking for a renewable energy fund. I think.
So sorry, I just point that out as consideration of that would be the fiscal impact. I know there's a lot in the fiscal note. It was not updated from when House Finance amended it, so I just wanted to point out that the administrative cost question was addressed in the amendment, but this would result in an additional $1 million going back to the general fund for the second year of the biennium, and not being used for programs at the agency.
Oh,
Thank you. How many employees would be affected and what would happen to them?
Thank you for the question. So currently we have one employee who actually got another job, and so she is leaving tomorrow, actually, who works on these programs. I think we would hold off until we see what the legislature wants to do with this before posting that position. There are other administrative costs. I know there's some questions about this. The Renewable Energy Fund doesn't just pay for the staff who works on these individual programs. There are staff in the regulatory support division who work to administer not only the RPS statute itself, so monitoring alternative compliance payments, doing REC registrations and things like that, as well as doing any of the agency's work on net metering, which is directly tied to the Renewable Energy Fund. Lastly, there is the statutory allowance that the Office of Energy Innovation be funded out of the Renewable Energy Fund. So in terms of the administrative costs, I know that question has come up a couple of times.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're going to close the hearing. Did you sign up? No soup for you. Let's see. I didn't see it, but go ahead. I don't have it.
1542.
Yeah. He's on there? Yeah. I'm dyslexic. That's my excuse.
Hey.
All right, go for it.
All right.
You are our final speaker.
Hey, Senators, thank you, and I will be very brief. For the record, I'm Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. And I do appreciate the opportunity to come to speak to you today in opposition to this bill. I think Sam Evans-Brown did an excellent job at explaining the mechanics and kind of how the RPS law works. And you've already gotten a little primer on low-grade wood and kind of how these programs benefit the forestry community, timberland owners. I won't go into that, but the one piece I did want to point out is when you look at these grants, they're leveraged. So a couple weeks ago, I sat up here with a young man, John Moses from Britton Lumber, who had a biomass boiler installed at their sawmill, and it's a great case study or a great example of how they get a grant from the Renewable Energy Fund. They provide funding as well. And, you know, it's to the tune of 1 to 9. In other words, for every $1 that's this program provides, private businesses and others are matching that 9 to 1. So it's a pretty darn good return on investment if you look at it that way, from, you know, fostering, benefiting businesses, but also benefiting, you know, forestry and landowners who have low-grade timber that needs a home from their properties. I'll conclude my testimony at that point. And again, I appreciate the sliding in under the wire here just before the gavel hit.
It was my fault. So with that, did I miss anybody? None. Good job.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm not going to ask any questions. All right. Thank you. Give me two minutes. Catch my thoughts. Representative Nutter.
No. He just hasn't opened the next hearing.
to HB 1622 FM. And I know the prime sponsor said she was going to come right back. So while we're waiting, you can look at your legislation and just kind of read it a little bit, enjoy it. Make pictures. But we're going to open up the hearing on this. And we'll wait for Representative Linda Haskins. Yes, I know. Sorry. Thank you. You are up, Linda. Linda. Yeah,
Are you still cold, Senator Rosenwald? We're hot. That's the problem. Are you Mark? Can you say hi early? Hello.
You have the floor,
Thank you.
Representative.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Linda Haskins from Exeter, representing Rockingham 11. So as prime on this bill, I'm going to make your life easier this morning. This is a very simple bill. Some work has been done on it. Imagine my surprise when it came out with a $4 million fiscal note, which was a misunderstanding between myself and DES. This is a bipartisan bill, by the way, and there is no fiscal note on it at all now. So what it does is it asks the state to consider landfill capacity among existing permitted landfills instead of greenfield sites. Since existing sites have already been carefully vetted and found suitable for landfilling by our own Department of Environmental Services. So it legislates the position already taken by the Senate, the governor, and the Department of Environmental Services, and essentially says expansions over greenfields. DES has years of familiarity with existing landfill sites, which are natural places to provide capacity when needed. And they are currently undergoing expansion plans. The bill gives the developers maximum flexibility. It does not ban greenfields, but if chosen, they must explain that choice. DES will use existing data, and as I mentioned, no fiscal note. So as I started, I want you to understand that this bill is carefully crafted so that we only put landfills where they will not harm our natural resources. We don't have a capacity problem as much as 2035 with what we have currently. And as I say, expansion plans are underway, and I think that will secure our landfill needs going into the future. So I hope you will support this bill. Easy peasy.
Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you very much. And well, first let's start with the fiscal note. Could you, will there be a revised fiscal note?
Oh, yes. It has been amended. It's zero.
We don't, okay, I didn't see it yet. But
Okay.
All right. So on the bill itself, could you parse out a little bit, lines 11 to 14 and then lines 15 to 19, the years, this language around the years which are permitted granted for at least half or one half of those years. And
Forgive me, Senator Waters, I have to get a copy of what you're reading. I had too many papers this morning.
Please do.
Could you please repeat the lines? in
Yeah, so,
question?
well, it's both sections. It's sections E and F on the first page, lines 11 through 19. So both those sections, it has this kind of calculation of half the years for the capacity and
So instead of
then the
leaving
first
it
year when the
open-ended,
shortfall is expected to exist. I just, if you could talk about that a little
okay,
bit.
well, instead of leaving it open-ended,
Yeah.
we thought half of the years that there could be a potential capacity shortfall would give us enough leeway so that something could be permitted. And frankly, that, you know, if that's a sticking point, we could work with that. But that was our best estimation as how to give developers an opportunity, some flexibility, et cetera.
Thank you, if I may, Mr. Chair.
You may.
Yes, so I can ask Mike, but you see, what I, having been on the original solid waste committee and so on and so forth, and done our tenure, that was my bill. It is very fungible as to what we're really talking about capacity, when, what it means, and what years. And so my anxiety is around, given the time it takes to develop a site, even an expansion, that how might this artificially limit what may need to be done even under your bill? And also, I mean, I guess what I'm kind of trying to accomplish, particularly, do you have some sense of on line 19 that, in a sense, they're saying, well, we'll permit it and you can do what you need to do to develop it, but you can't put anything there for who knows till when. So I'm just a little, if you know, you can see where my thoughts are.
Yes. So with the former point, expansion plans are already in play. So that's ongoing, right? And I don't think Henry Vayu is here at the moment, but Waste Management could speak about their plans in that regard. So, and as to the fungibility, what a good word, fungibility. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, honestly. Hopefully others behind me could do a better job.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing that, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Representative. Representative Germano?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I am Nick Tremana. I represent Cheshire District 15, which is Chesterfield, Hinsdale, most of Keene, Surrey, Westmoreland, and Walpole. I'm here to testify in favor of 1622 as amended. I think that kind of the virtues of the bill, the first part of the bill is a reflection of Senate policy. Much of this language was taken directly from what was inserted into HB2 by the Senate last year, stating a preference for the development of brownfields over new greenfield sites. The third section of the bill formalizes that policy and directs DES to formally prioritize expansions and greenfield development over brownfield development. The part of the bill that Senator Waters was asking about, this also exists in HB 215, which I will be back here to talk to you about on Thursday. And a big part of this was to address a ruling by the New Hampshire Supreme Court, I believe it was in December of 2024, regarding the definition of need, or of public benefit, pardon me, with respect to need. And one party in that case was saying, well, that need is one day, right? We permit these facilities for 20 years, and if one day of need exists, right? And then there was another party that said, no, you need to demonstrate need for the full 20 years. The Supreme Court basically ruled that the department has wide latitude to kind of decide in that case. I doubt that the department would determine one day of need to serve public benefit, but it's possible. So what this does is it attempts a Solomonic kind of approach, and we split the baby in half and say that we have a 20-year permitting period, and you need to be able to demonstrate that your facility will meet public need for at least half of the permitted lifetime of the facility. And then I'm happy to answer questions the committee may have about, and Senator Waters has stepped out, but specific to how this would work in particular at line 19, 18 and 19. The department shall not allow the new landfill to begin accepting waste until the first year in which a shortfall is expected to arise. If members have questions about that specific clause in the bill, I'm more than happy to discuss that. I also want to point out that the bill does a couple of other things which are, I think, relatively minor, but can make a significant difference in the work of the department. In section 3, Roman numeral 3 at line 30, this is on page 1. This is where there was some confusion with the original bill, which ended up with a very large fiscal note. Working with the department, I don't know if that fiscal note has been entirely erased, but certainly it has been dramatically reduced by having DES use all existing resources that they have to be able to eliminate some sources of, for example, brownfields that would just be completely unsuitable for any future development. But again, we worked with the department to make sure that that was within the department's current capacity.
Questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
Representative Potenza. You okay?
You know how it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, Representative Kelly Potenza, Stratford District 19. So I don't want to be redundant, so I just wanted to specifically say this bill came from some just great language that was, of course, testified, that came from the Senate, you know, promoting expansions over existing landfills rather than greenfields. And it came from an amendment from last session, or last year actually. You know, the General Corps prefers that new landfill capacity be developed in expansions of existing permitted landfills instead of on greenfield sites, because existing sites have already been carefully studied before being permitted and have been found suitable for landfilling by the Department of Environmental Services. The Department of Environmental Services typically has decades of familiarity with conditions at such sites, and the expansion of an existing use is generally consistent with the overall objectives of land use controls. So, in doing so, you have to quantify this. So, in late 2023, the New Hampshire Supreme Court essentially asked the legislature to define in law landfill capacity shortfall in some reasonable way. So the current law allowed an environmental group to claim in court that DES shouldn't grant a permit unless the proposed landfill would be remedying a shortfall for every single day of its operating life. And it also allowed a developer to claim that the law means DES must grant a permit if the facility was remediating a shortfall even for one day over decades. So in HB 1622, it basically offers the most obvious compromise. So DES can grant a permit as long as the facility will be solving a shortfall over at least half of its operating life. So that answers your question in regards with lines 11 through 19, okay? And I think, you know, I wish Waste Management, the lobbyist for Waste Management was here. They were, you know, we worked with them, of course, as well as with DES to get this to a point. I think that's what's really great is what we're asking for the department to do. When this first came out, it needed to be buttoned up, is to provide some information which is readily available to them, as well as, you know, looking at possible other sites. We're probably going to only need one new greenfield landfill, maybe in the next 100 years. So for that and that reason only, we need to make sure that it's in a great location and all of those things. So for them to be able to grab the information that's already available, which you can actually run some, you can run some things on their website with brownfields and all of that. It gives about 80% of that. But for the department to be involved in this, and we worked directly with them to get it to this point, we're hoping that it can pass the Senate.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Susan? No music for you this time.
As long as I'm here in Concord, I had to make it worthwhile. So Susan Richmond from Durham. And so I'm here to show that average citizens do pay attention to some of these bills and care about them. And I'm also really thrilled by the work of the Solid Waste Working Group, which attempts to reduce the amount of waste that we have, which is an even better solution to landfill if we can manage to have less waste. Governor Ayotte campaigned on resolving our landfill problems, and bipartisan HB 1622 provides reasonable, fair, and open first step in developing additional solid waste capacity by just creating an inventory of what we already have. And most of what's required is already available in current public records. Largely what I'm going to say is parroting the words of Dr. Adam Finkel and the testimony he gave you, that each site's name, address, the acreage of the tract, and its setback distance to the nearest home, airport, or water body is either available on the DES website or easily computed. And he estimated it would take 50 hours of work and not the extravagant 2 staff positions in 7 years that DES originally had estimated. So I just would like to say that with 1622, we're getting closer to solving landfill problems, and it's a sensible first step. Please find it ought to pass. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you, Susan. Catherine Corky. Okay. Sarah? She had to leave. Okay, Mr. Wimsatt, you're our final speaker.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsatt. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And I'm happy to be here this morning to testify regarding House Bill 1622. The department is not taking a position on this bill. We do have some observations that we'd like to raise for the and describe for the committee. This bill is very different than what was introduced, and we had significant concerns. Just to clear up, the original assignment that the bill would have given DES was very expansive, and that was what resulted in an outsized fiscal note. Those provisions of the bill have been significantly tempered, and our last evaluation of the bill as amended by the House was that it would not. Is that what it directs us to do with respect to collecting information about existing landfills is something we could do with existing resources, and that's why the fiscal note was significantly amended such that we said it wouldn't have an impact. Or that the impact it would have would be addressed by our existing staff. Just a few observations, and this is something that committee members have been asking about. Section 2 of the bill from lines 9 to 19 basically modifies the public benefit requirement in the statute and would require that existing facility expansions would need to show that the state would face a capacity shortfall for at least half the years of the proposed years of operation. And as we look at that, we have some concern that that could mean that an existing landfill might need to actually close temporarily to meet that requirement. So the landfills have permitted for a certain period of time, and once they've used up that capacity, they need to, if they want to continue operating, they need to seek a permit modification to expand the facility and get approval for new capacity. And every time they do that, they have to go to the statute and they have a responsibility with their application to make a showing that they meet the existing public benefit requirements in the statute. This modification in requiring that the proposed years of modification of expansion would need to happen during half of those years there would have to be a shortfall. Could mean that, for example, if a landfill that's been operating for years wants to expand, and at the time they want to expand, typically what the statute directs them to do is look at a 20-year planning period. So they look at that 20-year planning period, and typically what they do is they seek an expansion for those 20 years. They can do less, but they can't do more. And if, for example, you had a situation where an existing landfill was seeking expansion, and the shortfall that was calculated didn't begin for, say, then they wanted to run a 20-year period, and it didn't begin for 12 years, but the last 8 years there was a shortfall that they would be meeting. They would essentially, they could get a permit, as I read this, but they would not be able to operate necessarily, or they wouldn't meet the requirement basically, unless they shifted that 20-year period to a later date. So let's say they close in 2030 and the shortfall doesn't occur till 2042. They would have to close for 2 years until 2032 so that they would be meeting that half the year's requirement. I know that's a little confusing, but basically that's how that would work.
Well, to interrupt, if I may. This kind of gets at my concern, particularly about line 19. Is there a way to fix this? There's some language to fix these possibilities.
There probably is. So I would say line 19 is different because the two sections, what I was just talking about was an existing landfill expansion.
Is there a way to fix what problem you're addressing?
Well, the problem I'm raising, or the concern I'm raising, is tied to that half the years. So if you change that, then it wouldn't create the problem. There might be a way to, for existing landfills in particular, to create a situation where you'd have a different standard. And I don't know, I'm not sure what that would be. As Representative Germana indicated in his testimony, this issue was litigated up through our Waste Council and up through the Supreme Court. And I think Representative Germana correctly stated that the Supreme Court, in this decision on that case, suggested that the DES has relatively broad latitude to interpret that. So we have done that. In that particular case, we interpreted a certain way, and the court upheld our decision in that particular case. But I think once you start putting a quantitative, and we're not commenting on whether a quantitative approach to this is right or wrong. We're not taking a position on that, but I'm just raising, I want to make sure the committee understands that there could be an unintended consequence. That what could happen is that if you had that situation where an existing facility had to throttle back and not operate for a few years, it could be disruptive to the market, and also it would sort of defeat the purpose of the preference that's expressed in this bill for expansions of existing facilities rather than new facilities. So I'm afraid I don't have a solution to describe for you, Senator Waters, but I did want to make that observation. And then on the next thing I would want to chat about or mention is that on page 1, section 3, line 24, it establishes a preference for existing facilities, and then a second preference for development of brownfields facilities. But then it goes on to say that if a developer wants to develop a greenfield site, then they need to explain their choice as compared to this list that DES would create. In the original bill, there was going to be a list that included an evaluation of both existing landfills and brownfield sites. That has changed, so we're no longer being directed to evaluate brownfield sites for reasons that were vetted during the House session on this. So I'm not sure, it creates a little confusion there. And the DES list that would be created here would be a pretty short list. It would be basically the existing landfills and their prospects for potential expansion, and then probably a very small list of former municipally operated closed landfills that might also be good candidates for expansion and operation. And as I testified to in the House, and there was some discussion and testimony on this, most of those facilities, for a variety of reasons, are not good candidates for expansion to operate a new landfill. And from our understanding, most municipalities wouldn't be particularly interested in doing so. So I'm not sure that we're asking a developer that wants to site a new greenfield landfill to sort of vet that list and say why they didn't pick one of those facilities on that list. But that list is largely going to be comprised of existing facilities that presumably that developer may not own or have any access to, and then possibly a very diminishing list of closed municipal landfills that were evaluated. So I'll leave it at that and answer any questions.
I kind of lost what you were saying about line 24, Mike.
So on line 24, it basically that whole section 3, first gives the agency the directive to give expansion of existing landfills preference over development of brownfield or new development of landfills. And then it says give second preference to brownfield sites. And then that same section in paragraph 2 goes on to say that if a greenfield application is submitted, so a new development on a new site, then the developer, we can process that application only after the developer reviews and explains the choice of that site with the reference to the list of the sites that we developed. And I'm saying that site won't have any brownfield sites on it because we aren't going to be evaluating those, and it's going to be a very small list. So to the extent, I suppose the developer can go ahead and compare it to that list and it won't be a big lift. But I just wanted to point out that it may not be doing what I think was originally intended because the bill's been amended.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand this.
Sure.
3 years ago, the Supreme Court told us to define need because it could be one day or it could be every day for 20 years. Last year on House Bill 2, the state made policy that we prefer expansion to new landfills. And this bill doesn't prevent new landfills, but it just says, first, there have to be no applications for an expansion, an existing site, or a brownfield site. And all the developer has to do is explain themselves. Doesn't put any more meat on those bones. So it seems like it gives the department a lot of latitude.
Again, that last section, I only raise it because I think that it's not quite as effective as maybe it was intended to be. The department doesn't have any particular objection to it. I don't think that it creates a burden on anybody, on the department or the regulated community, that is insurmountable.
Okay. Does this bill require someone who wants to build a new landfill to first make sure there are both no pending applications for an expansion and no pending applications for a brownfield site? I can't tell the way it's written in
I don't.
Section 3. Does it have to be both things?
I do not read it to say that a developer of a proposed new greenfields landfill can't file an application even if there are pending applications for an expansion or a brownfield site. However, what I do read it to say is that if we have, let's say for argument's sake, you have absolutely equal applications that would operate during the same period, and the facilities that are proposed would operate during the same period and would provide the same amount of capacity, and either one independently would meet the public benefit requirements, then I think what it's telling the department is that we must, if it's otherwise approvable, we need to approve the application for an expansion preferentially over the application for a new landfill.
I'm sorry, follow up. Even if that new landfill is on a brownfield site?
Yes, because expansions are given first priority, first order of preference, and brownfields are given second order of preference.
Thank you.
Further discussion, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mike. This is very helpful. So let me go back to line 19, if I may.
Mhm.
So, you know, I earlier voiced it's just hard for me to know what that really would mean. Because someone might have to do all the work to prepare the expanded site, but then just wait. And, so I'm wondering whether or not, I mean, maybe that just works, I don't know, but, I'm wondering whether or not that line is even needed. But if it is, would there be would it be possible to say until the 5-year period of expected shortfall is reached? So that, you know, what's going to pull the trigger there? And should there be some more flexibility?
Well, I think to answer your first question, the only difference between E and F, and the reason I think there are 2 paragraphs there, is that the sponsor wanted to draw a distinction between an existing landfill. So for an existing landfill expansion, still has to, in order to meet public benefit, it would need to show that it's going to provide for half of its years of operations will address an existing shortfall. But it can start, if it meets that requirement, then as soon as it's ready, it can start operating. It doesn't have to wait till that shortfall begins. Paragraph F says that if it's a new landfill, in addition to having to meet that half the years of operation criterion, it would also not be able to open and begin operating until that exists. And our observation of that is that it could create a timing problem, just depending on, you know, an applicant it's a multi-year process to put an application together and get it through the application review process and get approved. And it would be potentially a little discouraging to developers of landfills if they thought that they're going to go through all that for 6 or 7 or 8 years, and then they're going to have to cool their jets for 3 or 4 years before they could actually operate the landfill. It could create a timing problem that could be somewhat disruptive.
So, you know, I mean, that kind of gets at what I'm thinking about is that, you know, let's say somebody spends a long time and justified under the criteria that are used that there's going to be a capacity shortfall, and at that point in time, the expansions have a certain capacity, and it's still expected there might be a capacity shortfall. Somebody spends several years in the process of developing a new site, but then somebody comes in a much quicker way, suddenly, you know, may say, well, we actually can do another expansion. And that would essentially, if that is approved more quickly, that other project which is underway then suddenly has to just kind of wait, because now you have some expanded capacity comes in.
I suppose that's possible, and particularly depending on whether we'd already issued a permit, because that would influence the public benefit analysis in
I
that
certainly
case.
agree with this bill. You know, I think the bill's a good idea and it's necessary.
Mhm.
But I'm just really, I'm a little anxious about creating a situation that is unworkable.
To answer your question again, I've not had a lot of time to think too much about this, but if you wanted to address the concern that line 19 is giving you, you could apply the same standard to an existing landfill as you do to a new greenfield landfill, so that you would really just need 1 paragraph there, and it would say, E would read for an applicant seeking to expand or create or site a new landfill, and then state the half years of the criterion. It would mean that a new landfill would have to meet just the same standard for public benefit as an existing landfill expansion.
But still, even if that were done,
Mhm.
the recognition would still be there that the priority was for the expansion.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I don't think it changes that. That's correct.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Moonset. We're going to close the hearing on 1622 and open up the hearing to 1478. We hear from the prime sponsor.
Interesting. Representative, whenever you're ready, please begin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for the record, Representative Kelly Potenza, Stratford District 19. So I'm here to introduce HB 1478, which came to the committee before. We've been on this, working on rules and to improve the rules that came out for a long time. I was on the committee in the House that met for several months, that went through the whole rulemaking process. And when the first bill came out, it was way more expansive than it is now. This has been worked on exhaustively with the department, with other stakeholders, representatives, and this is where we are at now. So what does 1478 really do? So basically, in November of 24, GELCAR unanimously voted that the new DES rules, Environment ENV SW 800, were contrary, I'm going to quote, contrary to public interest, contrary to legislative intent, and designed to benefit the administrative convenience of DES to the detriment of the public. That was what their decision was. A month later, GELCAR reversed its vote, despite not a word of the rules or the DES response document being changed. That was very upsetting for a lot of people, a lot of constituents, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of representatives. But we concluded that it was the legislature's job to make policy of this type of change. That's where HB 707 came, which this committee took HB 707, stripped it all out, and put another bill in. So here's 1478. So this is what we were asked to do. It fixes basically the single most dangerous mistake in the DES rules, which is namely the provisions that allow a new greenfield landfill site pretty much almost anywhere in the state, depending on, with the hydrogeologically inappropriate local soil and bedrock is. These rules are actually the weakest in any developed and less developed in the world, weaker than actually powerhouses, that's a joke, like Mississippi, India, and Nigeria. So we have worked on many possible things that were an issue, taken away the stuff that gave a fiscal note. I removed the 24/7 guard on duty. I have removed all of these types of things that were an issue. I changed it back to match the current rules in regards with a 50-year storm instead of a 100-year. So the stuff that has stayed is the most important, and it has to do with groundwater travel time. So I know that the department will come up and speak. Like I said, we've worked very closely on this in our committee. The argument that I don't know if it's going to be made today, I'm going to rebut it right now. So the only objections right now to this bill talks about groundwater travel time. So I'm just going to read this. DES argues that groundwater travel time outside the landfill track may differ from travel time measured within the track, implying that the bill's 5-year travel time standard is unreliable. That argument collapses under basic logic and under DES's own existing rules. So DES already claims that the current 800 rules are more protective because they allegedly ensure that release, detection, characterization, and remediation can be conducted prior to a release having an adverse impact on water supply. But this claim necessarily assumes that groundwater behavior outside the track can be inferred from measurements taken on the track. Otherwise, DES could not possibly claim early detection or timely response under current law. So DES can't have it both ways. If uncertainty about plume velocity after leaving the track invalidates the bill's 5-year standard, then it also invalidates DES's existing rules, which rely on the same hydrogeologic assumptions without any clear enforceable time boundary at all. In public science and environmental regulation, the default assumption is that conditions do not materially change absent evidence that they do. The measured groundwater velocity at the track boundary is the best available estimate of off-site velocity. If DES believes otherwise, the burden is on the agency to prove that change, not to dismiss a clear enforceable standard in favor of vague assurances. And that's what the rules have right now. It's vagueness. This bill fixes several issues that make it rock solid. So it replaces the current regulatory posture of we'll promise we'll get there in time, meaning for a pollution, with a bright line measurable rule, 5 years. That is not weaker. It's objectively stronger, clearer, and more enforceable than the status quo. The other piece that came to our committee was about ample margin of safety. And this was kind of upsetting. So it's not vague. It's actually the gold standard of environmental law. So DES suggested, explicitly or implicitly, that the statutory language requiring protection of health and the environment with an ample margin of safety is vague or problematic. That position is flatly inconsistent with decades of federal environmental law. The Safe Water Drinking Act 1974 directs regulators to set standards at levels where, quote, no known or anticipated adverse effects on the health of persons occur and which allow an adequate margin of safety. The Clean Air Act of 1990 requires the EPA to regulate hazardous air pollutants, quote, with an ample margin of safety. These phrases have been in continuous use for 35 to 50 years. They've survived extensive litigation and are foundational to environmental regulation. They are intentionally flexible to allow judicial review from both directions. Citizens may argue the agency failed to protect health adequately, but regulated entities may argue that the agency exceeded what is ample or adequate. That is not vagueness, that's accountability. So HB 1475 simply aligns New Hampshire law with this long settled legal framework by explicitly directing DES to protect public health and the environment with an ample margin of safety when adopting landfill rules. Suggesting otherwise is misleading, and committee members should not be basically gaslit into thinking this language is novel or defective. It is neither. And I don't have any issues now because the fiscal note has been pretty much completely taken away. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to ask. It's pretty sad that we're missing the people that is the most important to hear this bill, but.
I thank you for your testimony. Questions for the representative? Yes, please, madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. In my reading about what can go into leachate, I read that it could be PFAS, it could be pharmaceuticals, it could be heavy metals, it could be endocrine disruptors. Is that your understanding as well of what could get into the groundwater and the surface water?
Oh, yes. Leachate, as we should all know, is the toxic trash juice, and I've spent so much time on this. And so, in addition to, PFAS is PFOAs, that's the hot topic that everybody talks about, the forever chemicals, and that's horrific. But there's so many other things that are just as horrific, and there is only so much, which millions of gallons of leachate. One landfill, I actually testified to this on the House floor, can generate millions and millions of gallons in its lifetime. After a landfill closes, that landfill is still generating leachate for 50, could be 100 years, literally. So plastic doesn't, 2 layers of plastic doesn't protect us from all of that. It's very, very important to make sure that that landfill is in the correct location. As you know, that leachate is being trucked all over the state to wastewater treatment plants, and they can't take all of that out. And that ends up going back right into either the landfill again, it's like this circular thing, creates biosolids, which there's a bill that I don't know if it's come to you or not yet, that talks about this and spreading biosolids that are, of course, over agricultural lands. There's a lot of controversy on that, as well as it goes right back into rivers and in our drinking water. So it's very, very concerning. These are huge, huge environmental things that we have to consider. And when we're building a landfill, like I said, I'm going to put on record again, we only probably need one for the next 100 years, a new greenfield in New Hampshire. If we actually put New Hampshire trash first, then let's make sure we do it the right way. And these rules are important.
Thank you, Representative. Further questions, please, Senator Rosenwald.
I think public health is really important, and drinking water is certainly part of that. And a few years ago, there was a proposal in Nashua to build an asphalt plant downtown in a residential district. And what disturbed me about the hearing that DES conducted was that they said, we are responsible for public health. And when I asked them, okay, well, you know that New Hampshire has a particularly high rate of childhood asthma. How are you going to make sure that that's not intensified? There just was kind of no response because it's really the responsibility of HHS, but DES is in charge of these sites. So do you agree with me?
I 100% agree with you. I think it's so many things that that play into this. Wasn't it 2 years ago that New Hampshire came out? We were number 2. I don't know if we're number 1 now for the highest rate of childhood cancer. All of those things. What is in our food? What is in our water? The environment. Of course, same thing with all of the HHS stuff, certain medicines. Those types of things all have to be looked at. It's body burden. And I say this all the time. My side of the aisle always wants to talk about the New Hampshire advantage. There is zero New Hampshire advantage if we don't have clean drinking water, clean spaces in these special places in New Hampshire. And because once we don't have that, we don't have anything. And people can't live here, they can't thrive here. So I remember the pushback. I remember what took place in Nashua, and those things are really important. I can't imagine anyone wanting to, a lot of people say it's a NIMBY argument or these types of things when it comes to a landfill. I'm in Rochester, so I hear it all. We have the largest landfill in the state. And, I really believe that we have to do better. And we haven't. We are ranked the lowest in regards with recycling. We're ranked the lowest on all of these types of things. I would love to have amazing clean technologies in New Hampshire. We have wonderful things in writing that talks about diverting waste and all of these types of things, what the hierarchy is, the pyramid, upside down pyramid, whatever you want to call it about. And landfills are the last possible resort. But we still go back to these old ways of wanting to dig a hole in the ground. So this is not, it should not ever be a partisan issue. Public health should always come first.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. May I have Representative Potenza? I apologize. It's on the list. How about Representative German, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Again, I'm Representative Nick Germain of Cheshire 15. I won't go into great detail. I just want to, first of all, say I've tremendous respect for the work that the department does. And I want to give some background to how we got to this point where we felt it was necessary to have legislation that provided this very specific hydrogeology standard. When the department was rewriting the rules, our House Environment and Agriculture Committee, we had an oversight subcommittee. We met with the department regularly to review drafts of the rules. We expressed our concern about a number of aspects of those rules. In particular, one of the issues that we felt very strongly about was that the setback distance should be about time of travel. To me, that ultimately, when you're talking about distance is a function of time. How long will a pollutant take to get to a protected body of water, right? That's a time issue. So then from that time, you work out what the appropriate distance should be, right? You need to make sure that the amount of time you're giving yourself is adequate to make sure you can absolutely protect those bodies of water. We gave that input to the department. The department chose, despite the fact that many states, including states around us, use this very same standard, they chose to continue with the same standards that we have used in the past. That went to JLCAR, as my colleague was talking about. There was an initial objection because members of JLCAR determined that the rules were not sufficiently protective of public health. It came back a couple of weeks later, no changes had actually been made, but JLCAR moved it forward because they said, and I understand where they were coming from, that they're not a policy committee, right? Their job is to make sure that the process is followed. The House Environment and Agriculture Committee is a policy committee. You are a policy committee. So it is the prerogative of the legislature. When we hear from our constituents, as we have year after year, that these rules are not protective enough, and when we compare our rules to the rules of states around us and to the rules that are in place in other countries, and find that we need a stricter standard to protect exactly the New Hampshire advantage that Representative Potenza was talking about. So that's how we've gotten to this place. I don't always believe that it is the smartest thing to do for the legislature to legislate very specific standards. We'll have the biosludge bill coming before you all in the near future. That's a case where we determined it was best not to put in a specific number, for reasons I'll talk about when that bill comes to you. In this case, given our history of working with the department, my experience on that oversight committee, my experience in the testimony with JLCAR and JLCAR's initial objection, and their determination that this was work for policy committees, this is what you have in front of you is the work of our policy committee. So I will leave it at that. Hopefully, I've given you some history and some reason why we have chosen this path.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions to the representative? Seeing none, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Do I have any other representatives wishing to speak? Haskins, please come forward. And I apologize, ladies, for transposing our names back and forth. I'm back on track here.
For the record, Linda Haskins, Rockingham 11, Exeter. You have before you the trash trio of environment and agriculture. We are a bipartisan group, and that has worked very hard. I did not know when I came to environment and ag that I would spend as much time and energy on trash, but there you have it. We have done extensive work, and my colleagues have outlined it brilliantly. There's very little more that I can say. It was dispiriting to go to JLCAR and hear an objection that then got reversed. So we knew we had to do something, and this is a result of the work we did. Rep. Germana talked about the oversight committee, months-long work, and we do work, I think, very productively with DES. We don't always agree, but that's natural. The point is we recognize that we have our role, they have theirs, and inserting ourselves into the rules was necessary because the statute didn't give us enough definition, and the rules do. That's how the statutes get enacted. So again, the 5-year travel time is key to this task, and we hope that you will support it because it's not extreme, but it is definite so that we can ensure safety because this leachate is so toxic and has a lifespan beyond any of us. So I hope you will support the bill. We're happy to work with DES continually. If there are modifications that have to be made, we can do that.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Susan Richmond. Nice to see you again, Susan.
Thank you. So I represent the layperson's opinion, and I'd like to also add that I'm very concerned about plastics. So microplastics are also a big part of the leachate that enters the underground water stream when the ground is conductive. So earlier proposals for landfill regulations stipulated the one-size-fits-all distance for landfill setback from a water body, and HB 1478 respects the fact that water travels differently through different types of soil, and that it is necessary to use our geological knowledge to come to the specific safe distance and assess soil conductivity for any given proposed landfill. And also, I don't know if I've read the most recent iteration of the bill, but it was my understanding that 1478 also provides safety considerations and requires compliance with safety standards. And given the news stories this year about the extraordinary landfill safety violations that have been cited, it is a relief to know that 1478 would help protect New Hampshire citizens from indifferent landfill practices and unsafe landfill practices. So that's my...
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you so much.
May I ask from NHDS, Mike Wimsatt, please come forward. Be our final speaker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsatt. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you today about House Bill 1478. The department is not taking a position on this bill. We would like to identify some observations and concerns that we have, and I'll then be happy to take any questions. First of all, with regard to Section 3 being on line 20, it establishes a setback from drinking water wells, river, lake, and coastal water based on a 5-year groundwater travel time, as has been indicated by the sponsors. It requires an independent hydrogeologist to evaluate this based upon on-site testing only on the landfill site itself. Given that the travel time of any contaminants will be influenced much more by the characteristics of the formation between the landfill and the surface water in question, and not the landfill footprint, it doesn't really answer the question without off-site data on the formation. But regardless of that, DES does indeed believe that its current rules are in fact more effective and more protective than this approach, because we currently require that landfills be sited such that any contamination can be detected, investigated, and remediated, and this is important, before it reaches the property line, not before it reaches the sensitive receptor. So the reason that rule is better and more protective is that when we permit a landfill, we have a lot of information about the formation that it overlies. We know about what the groundwater characteristics are. We know what the soil characteristics are, and we have a good understanding of what groundwater velocities might be underneath that landfill. And when we evaluate a proposed landfill, whether it be an expansion of an existing facility or a new facility, we are having to make a determination that a release from that facility could be detected, investigated, and remediated before that contaminant reaches the property line. So that is far more protective than what this suggests. And again, I want to draw that distinction. It's about the property line, not the sensitive receptor. Also, to that end, it's unclear to us why, if these protections are deemed to be so important that are proposed in the bill, why they're exempting existing facilities from those protections. It seems to us that communities where existing facilities lie deserve the same level of protection as community members where a new facility might be proposed. And in fact, our current rules that I just described already are applicable to the expansion of new facilities. So that's our concern about that. Also on page 3, lines 5 to 7, it does change the paragraph item 7 to say that rulemaking must provide an ample margin of safety. We're not terribly exercised about this, but I did raise this question in testimony before the House, and I'll raise it again. It isn't necessarily clear what that means, and we wonder whether it would need to be defined or some kind of quantitative measure of that developed. And the reason is that, as the sponsors indicated, this language does appear in both federal and state law regarding setting drinking water standards. But in those cases, the way that drinking water standards are set, and the methods that the professionals who do that use, there's already significant factors of safety and ample margins of safety kind of baked into the processes that they conduct. So it's sort of, it doesn't have such an impact there. Where under this provision, we would be advised to provide an ample margin of safety for every single rule that we write, and there are many tens of pages of rules regarding landfills. It just becomes a little bit less clear what that really means. So again, we're not terribly exercised about that, but I do want to raise that there's a distinction between using that term when you're setting numerical drinking water standards and when you're writing specific standards for design and operation of a landfill. And then lastly, on page 2, lines 25 to 30, that's where there's a requirement that 20 feet of in situ soils beneath the proposed landfill footprint, that those be analyzed and determine what the maximum hydraulic conductivity would be for that. And it's unclear to us, based on the language in the bill, whether that's a macro scale evaluation of the formation or whether it's a single location measurement. And if it's the latter, if it's a single location measurement, it could exclude any site from development due to a relatively small area of soil that's neither contiguous nor representative of the macroscale properties of that formation. And so, again, it applies to this 20-foot depth of in situ soils, and it could be, if interpreted to mean a single measurement anywhere in that formation that doesn't meet the 10 to the -4 standard, would exclude a site. We think that with New Hampshire's geology, that could be exclusionary for an awful lot of sites that otherwise would be appropriate and safe places to design and construct a landfill. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Questions? Senator Waters.
Thank you. Mike, on page 3, line 1, I'm sorry, page 3, line 1, where the may is changed to shall. So in looking at that, there's an A, B, and C after that in statute.
Mm-hmm.
And C references any conviction of a felony and includes a very, very large array of potential people, investors, board members, and so on and so forth. And, you know, a felony is a felony, but nonetheless, there are a lot of circumstances of people's lives over many decades. And does it make sense to you to have the shall there when it may have been something decades before and it may have not had any relationship to the actual work of a landfill or the company?
Thank you for the question. I didn't comment on that, but the department does believe that the may language that exists in the statute now is appropriate. I will give you a little history. This is something that we considered. We have it for both hazardous waste facilities and solid waste facility permit decisions, and we have exercised it in a particular case where a applicant who was going to have significant involvement in the activity had recently been convicted of a felony, and we denied the permit. So we're prepared to implement that provision when appropriate. But as you state, there may be circumstances where some discretion, and we would certainly, in a case like that, when we're making an important decision like that, we would seek counsel of the Department of Justice in making a decision like that. So I think that allowing the department to have some discretion with respect to that is probably appropriate.
Thank
Further
you.
question? Yes. Senator Roosevelt, please. I'm hoping for a question and not an, do you agree with me?
And now what?
A question. You're recognized for a question.
Thank you. Have any liners ever leaked in any landfill anywhere?
Sure. Liners are, the science of liners is, and the operation and maintenance of liners is complex, right? And so when you install a liner at a facility, these facilities that we permit are required to be double lined. And that is not actually true in every state. So despite the accusations that we have the weakest rules in the nation, we can point to states in the United States that don't require a double liner. So we take exception to that. But setting that aside, when they're constructed typically of 60 mil thickness, high density polyethylene. And that there are very specific requirements for how that's welded. The sheets are welded together, and then testing is done to make sure that those welds are sound and leak tight. But again, a landfill is a construction site, so there are things that happen, and there are a lot of things that go into making sure that that liner at the time of installation is not damaged. And there's a lot of requirements for quality control checking. And then when you first start filling, you are required to use softer waste to make sure there's nothing that could be allowed to puncture the liner. So there's a lot that goes into, I won't go into all the details, but a lot goes into making sure that when those liners are installed, that they are intact and that they're functioning properly. The whole purpose of a double line system is to ensure that any leakage in the primary liner is captured by the secondary liner. And yes, there are some leaks and they occur for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they are because of an imperfection. Sometimes they're because someone was careless when they were doing construction or maintenance and a piece of heavy equipment punctured a liner. And those things have happened. And the benefit of the groundwater monitoring that we do and the monitoring in the secondary liner is that we typically detect those things. And when we detect them, there's a whole host of requirements for the facility operator to then go into more intensive monitoring and then to investigate to determine if and where there might be a leak and then to repair that leak and then monitoring to make sure that repair was effective. So the answer to your question simply is yes, they can and do leak. But the way that the facilities are designed and monitored, we don't, we have a number of double line facilities that operate. We have 6 double lined solid waste landfills in the state that operate. And while there have been leachate releases as a result of leachate handling, we don't have a situation where groundwater is significantly impacted as a result of light leaks in the liner system. Again, it's a complex business and there's things we could probably talk about it for a whole afternoon, but the short answer is that these double line systems to date have proved to be very effective when you combine them with the operation and maintenance and oversight requirements that apply in New Hampshire.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Could you help me understand, please, how you can ensure that a spill or leak won't reach the surface water before it leaves the property line if the department doesn't have any requirement as to what the soil conditions are or how much lead time you would need to detect and remediate the leak?
Yes, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And that is, so the way that, the fact is we do have significant requirements for evaluating soil conditions underlying a landfill and also for what is constructed above those in situ soils when the landfill is constructed. So we know a lot about the formation when a landfill is approved for construction, and we can estimate travel times for groundwater, and we also so we have an idea. We know a lot about the hydrogeological characteristics of the formation underneath the landfill, and we use that information to determine if there were a release, how fast that release might be able to travel before it got to the property line. And then in making a permit decision, we're looking at that. We're looking at the distance of the landfill and the liner system from the property line. We're looking at what we know about the formation. And then, more importantly, you always want to verify, right? We have Sentry wells that are required to be installed and operated and monitored all around the landfill footprint. So we are not just counting on the fact that the design in the operation is working well and assuming that it's safe. We're checking that through Sentry monitoring wells that are installed that are required to be sampled and analyzed for contaminants several times a year. Those reports are required to come to DES for review. And whenever we see something in one of those wells, it triggers an investigation. It triggers more intensive monitoring. And it becomes incumbent on the landfill operator to determine why that contaminant showed up in that well, to determine whether it's related to a release at the landfill, and if so, to investigate that potential for release and to repair it and fix it. And then that monitoring continues on a more intensive schedule until that well returns to ambient groundwater quality standards.
Any further questions? Thank you, sir, for your testimony. I have no one else signed up for this hearing. Is there anyone that spoke that would briefly like to speak one more time? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing.
We're done.
Thank you.